We started some work in the early 90s here at CERN, but there was also many activities around the world concerning these type of systems, which were what we call known as accelerator-driven systems. So this is basically a reactor which is operated or driven by an external source, and in this case we use accelerators. Accelerators so accelerate charged particles. When charged particles collide with, you can collide with other charged particles, and you have something which is very similar to a collider machines like the LHC. LHC, the result of this is that you produce many particles, not necessarily energy, but you produce many particles. Now, if you go down a little bit in energy, so in around a few giga electron volt, when protons of about 1 GeV, so 1 giga electron volt, bombard, how do you say, nuclei, other nuclei, so heavy materials like a piece of lead or iron or copper, things like that. There is a reaction which is mostly preponderant in there, which is a spallation reaction. So it splits the target nuclei into its constituents, and the constituents of a nucleus are protons and neutrons. So we found a way, basically, this is a reaction which is very proliferating, quote, from a neutron point of view. So it produces a lot of neutrons. It's actually much better than the fission process or the fusion process in itself. So one proton impinging on lead, for example, so the heaviest, one of the heaviest natural occurring nuclei, we have at 1 GeV produces something like 30 neutrons, so about 10 times more than what fission would do. So by making use of this reaction, people have thought, okay, if we couple this to a reactor, then we could, with the use of this very proliferant or very intense neutron source, spallation neutron source, we could basically operate the reactor or the fission, control the fission reaction with this process. So the idea was to couple an accelerator to the reactor and have the reactor, the whole device, controlled by the accelerator. So the reactor would be in a state where alone it will not be critical, so it will be undercritical, so the chain reaction could not be maintained, you know, if on its own from very basic principle. So either because of its geometry or because of its fuel composition. So the reactor, as I said, is subcritical from its by its own nature, meaning that it will be very difficult for such a device to go critical. And therefore one could think that accidents like Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island, where we had a criticality, well, in the case, particularly in the case of Chernobyl, which was a criticality accident, this would never occur, but not from a point of view of, from a probabilistic approach. It would just be not physical for this reactor to go critical, and therefore to go overcritical. So no criticality accidents. So there you already, how do you say, you've already taken care of one of the major points. If you remember the 4 points I've listed, the 4 disadvantages or the 4 problems, issues associated with nuclear technology today. So one would be the risk of having a criticality accident. Of course, the other accidents are still possible, which is a core meltdown and the things. But this can be more or less solved from a technological point of view. Now, associated with this system, so as I said, in order to have this spallation neutrons, so to have this proliferation of neutrons in the system, to drive the system, you need heavy materials, so like lead as a target. And then it could be very easily thought that we could basically use the lead also to extract the heat from the reactor. Now, the advantage of using lead as or lead bismuth as a coolant is that lead is a very heavy material, so it's one of the denser elements that we have in nature, and therefore can accumulate heat. So it's very difficult to boil lead. You can boil water at 100 degrees. Lead boils at almost 2000 degrees, 1900 degrees, basically. So When you have this issue, you can already imagine that an accident like we had at Fukushima, for example, where because the pumps, cooling pumps failed, the water in the reactor started to boil. By boiling, so it just vaporized, reached the top of the reactor containment, which was cold. Therefore, the water vapor condensed, and what happened is that we have an accumulation of hydrogen with a high temperature, and hydrogen with oxygen exploded. However, with lead it would have been very difficult, because lead, you have to wait till you reach temperatures of about 1900 degrees for lead to boil. So if we had a lead reactor there, probably nothing would have happened. Because of its density, so buoyancy would probably have started to move, you know, like, how do you say, this is, if you have a dense material and you change the density, so you start producing, so you will produce a convective movement, a natural convection movement, which would have helped in order to extract the heat. The combination of a fast neutron spectrum plus extra neutrons from the spallation reaction gives you this added capacity to burn longer the fuel and save therefore on resources, so you have a more efficient system. So that's very good. It gives you also the capacity to put poisons or other material in the reactor to get burned. And this introduces the concept of transmutation. So we can think of burning the nuclear fuel that we generated before. So instead of burying this fuel waste in the underground, so we can design machines basically relying on this technology where you would just fuel them with the waste, so the plutonium, the americium, neptunium, curium that you have accumulated over the years. You will just fuel them with that, and you zap them with the proton beam, and they will undergo fission, capture and fission process, like in a reactor. But, you know, and produce energy, of course. But all these reactions will be maintained because of the availability of the beam. With these accelerator-driven systems, because you have the additional neutrons from the proton spallation reactions, you can start putting thorium. And thorium, you just let it basically evolve, arrive to its equilibrium condition where you will breed uranium-233 in combination with thorium, and at that point, basically the system can basically evolve on its own for 5 to 10 years without having to interchange. So it gives you the added capacity. So this introduces the other aspect, is that you switch from uranium to thorium with the help of these systems. The major advantage there is that you don't produce plutonium. So it's very difficult to produce plutonium from thorium. 8 neutron capture reaction away. So it means that the nuclei will have to sit there and capture 8 neutrons successively, basically to arrive to plutonium-239, which is very unlikely. So this is the major change. So the use of thorium would basically already solve the non-proliferation issue in the terms of that no plutonium would be produced as a result of this. So it's a non-proliferant fuel. Of course, if you mix the nuclear waste with thorium, so you could use this as a matrix basically to house the nuclear waste and burn this nuclear waste. So basically this is like a dream machine in the sense that it generates electricity without generating waste. I mean, plutonium and minor actinides, you still do fission, so you'll still generate fission products. But these are things which basically after a few hundred years, you know, they will lose their toxicity, let's say, but not the plutonium and the americium. These, they keep on staying for a few 100,000 to a million years. But there are disadvantages, not from a physical point of view, so it's not that they will, how do you say, result in produce other accidents, no. It's just that today we are at the limit in terms of technology for the deployment of these machines. So there's still a lot of R&D to be done basically to prove that these concepts can work. We've made a series of experiments worldwide to test that in principle it works. So we can operate or run a system which is undercritical with the help of an accelerator. So we've done it at CERN. You need a more powerful machine demonstrators, and this is where you start hitting the technological barrier, in the sense that you need very powerful accelerators. We have very energetic accelerators like the LHC, but not necessarily powerful. So powerful accelerators are still to be developed. So today we can deliver 1 megawatt of beam power. And for these systems, in order to be efficient, so to burn a few hundreds of kilograms, so we're talking of nuclear waste, we're talking about 10 to 15 megawatt of beams. And of course, when I say that, with power comes also materials. So we need the materials that can withstand these beam powers. So if today we can do 100 megawatt, I believe that in 10 years we will have a full how do you say, pre-series or commercial machine. So 10 to 15 years. So I would say 2025, 2030 will probably have the full scale 1-to-1 prototype probably ready. And then a few years to learn how these machines, to get some experimental feedback on the way these machines operate, and we can probably think of deploying these machines by 2050, 2060, which is today basically the limit as far as the availability of uranium. So that could be a nice transition from uranium to thorium, and is also basically would be the end of the life of the third generation of nuclear reactors. The question is that we need to get, we need to have a demonstrator already available today to start to learn, and this is where it's very difficult this is where we are facing the problem today, is that nuclear industry is not particularly attracted by this scenario, because they're already developing the fourth generation. So the generation of nuclear reactors that will come on, how do you say, that will come in the year 2050. And now we'll tell them, but look, I mean, there is probably a different technology that could be available. So there is some kind of, they see it as a competition. And politicians are also not very much in favor, because the public is, after Chernobyl and Fukushima, we just got around Chernobyl as far as public acceptance is concerned. But now with Fukushima, it's very difficult, at least in Europe, basically, to talk about, how do you say, developing nuclear power. So, however, for most countries, even in the case that some countries would like to phase out from nuclear power, still you will have the problem of nuclear waste, and you will have to do something. And these systems are adapted basically to destroy nuclear waste. So they would fit in whatever policy is basically decided in Europe or otherwhere in the world. So whether to promote nuclear power, to develop further nuclear power, or to phase out nuclear power, you'll need this technology basically. You will have to consider at some point that a lot of countries will want to have access to this form of energy one day or the other, and you have to provide them with the right technology, which is a non-proliferant technology, and a technology that doesn't produce nuclear waste, or at least limits considerably the quantity of nuclear waste. So the advantage of this technology or this system is that it can bring together, you can easily form collaborations basically. Not a single country, I think, is capable today of designing and putting together a system on its own. Impossible. It's a country that will have to master both the accelerator technology, the reactor technology, and the fuel technology, and the reprocessing technology. So India has a role to play, because today it masters the back end and the front end and the back end of the fuel cycle, as far as of the thorium fuel cycle. However, it has a problem. India is forced basically to to look into thorium because it has very limited uranium resources, and because they have not signed the non-proliferation treaty and they have nuclear weapons, so they are somehow barred from the uranium world market. So they cannot buy uranium freely in the world market. So they have to use their indigenous resources, so which is a uranium ore, which is very difficult to mine. So then they have to develop the other technologies basically to deploy thorium. And this is a very awkward situation because this is a country which basically now, in order to be able to use thorium, they have to deploy 3 types of reactors and 3 types of nuclear fuel cycles. So they use this first in the first stage where they use natural uranium CANDU, so they produce a lot of plutonium, so proliferation. So some of this plutonium is used for civilian application. The other one is basically used to produce nuclear bombs, and their neighbors are doing the same, Pakistan. So so part of this plutonium is used in fast breeder reactors. So these are reactors which operate on sodium, where the plutonium, basically the plutonium is used to produce fission in the inner core. The outer core is just natural uranium or depleted uranium blanket. And this is a blanket where you again accumulate plutonium. So at the end, when you look at the mass balance, you produce much more plutonium than you've burned. So you produce plutonium in phase 1 with CANDU, you multiply the quantity of plutonium in this phase 2, in the fast breeder reactors. Now they've replaced the depleted uranium blanket by thorium. So then they breed uranium-233 into the thorium. So they enrich the thorium fuel in phase 2, and then in the phase 3 they put this enriched thorium fuel into a pressurized heavy water reactor to burn thorium. So in order to burn thorium, they have to have 3 kinds of reactors and 3 different fuels. So this is there's no country in the world which can afford, from a cost point of view, to maintain these 3 technologies. If they had, on the opposite, an accelerator-driven system, basically you would get rid of the first 2 phases and just burn thorium directly. Because what they do in the first 2 phases is to get the fissile material, basically to light up the thorium. And this can be replaced by neutrons coming from a spallation reaction, which plays the same role as a fissile material. So India has an interest in accelerator-driven system. It's part of the international collaboration, basically. So they have collaboration agreements with the US, with Japan, with Europe, basically, to develop the accelerator technology. So this is the part which they are missing, as far as knowledge is concerned. My name is Yacine Kadi. I'm a nuclear physicist and currently leading a project which is to build a radioactive ion beam facility at CERN. I've been at CERN for the last 20 years, collaborating with Professor Rubbia, who's a Nobel Physics Prize winner, former Director General of CERN, and one of the inventor of this Energy Amplifier accelerator-driven system. So I've been working on this with him, collaborating with him on this for the last 18 years.